Welcome, Sundry readers. I hope you enjoy today's story. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Happy listening! New Faces, New Friends by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 15. And a Happy New Year.
"You're wearing a hole in the carpet," Sarah Jane said to me. "Alma's been asleep for 15 minutes. Why don't you sit down?"
I'm nervous, that's why. I don't know how you can sit there so calmly. Aren't you worried about what will happen if the baby comes before Thomas gets back with your ma?
I can sit here because it's easier than moving. Why should I worry? You're here, aren't you?
You've answered your own question,
I told her. I pulled back the curtain to look out the window again. Snow was falling heavily, and the dull gray sky showed no promise of clearing. Thomas had come to get me early that morning. "I can't wait any longer for the weather to lift," he said anxiously. "I'm going to get Sarah Jane's mother today. She insists that she's still just fine, but I'd feel a lot better if you were there with her."
Of course I'll go, I said. Len can eat with his folks this noon and come to your house tonight. We'll get along fine.
Now the afternoon was waning, and there was no sign of Thomas and Mrs. Clark. I knew that fussing wouldn't bring them any faster, but I couldn't seem to settle down. "Put Alma down and fix us some tea," Sarah Jane said. "Maybe that will calm your nerves." When I got up to clear the cups away, I stopped at the window to look out.
It's still snowing and drifting,
I reported.
I hope Len comes over as soon as he finishes milking.
"We're doing all right without him," Sarah Jane said.
I'd feel better if he were here to go for Dr. Mason if we need him. I wouldn't want to leave you alone to go myself, especially since I couldn't very well take Alma with me. I do wish we had a telephone out here.
"We will have one by summer," Thomas says. "Something tells me I won't be able to wait quite that long." I looked at her with alarm.
Are you all right? Should I go now?
"I'm fine," she insisted. "There may not be any action around here for several days yet. Calm down, Mabel. Either sew or read to me." I found a book and began to read aloud, and Sarah Jane picked up her knitting. Time went faster that way, and I made only a couple of trips to the window. When Alma cried, I tended to her. By the time she was asleep again, it was too dark to see the road. We had lighted the lamps some time before, and we were in no danger of running out of firewood. Nevertheless, I would have felt much easier if either Len or Thomas would show up. At 6 o'clock, I fixed supper, and we ate, leaving the men's meal on the back of the stove to keep warm. "We may as well have evening prayers," Sarah Jane said. "I know you've been praying for the last 4 hours, but I'll find something comforting to read, and we'll pray out loud." She opened the Bible to the Psalms and read a couple of verses. "O rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart."
Rest, wait, and be still are hard commands for me to follow, I said when she had finished reading. But I do trust the Lord. I know he isn't going to leave us here alone or in need.
We prayed together, and I did feel more at ease. Sarah Jane was her usual cheerful, unworried self, and since I had committed all of us to the Lord's care, I relaxed and enjoyed the warmth of the fire.
You can hear the timber wolves much closer here than we can, I said. Do they come near the house?
"Usually no further than the clearing," Sarah Jane said. "You're cleared to the river, remember? They aren't likely to cross over to your side."
I hope not. They're beautiful animals as long as they stay in their woods.
"I imagine they think the same about us," Sarah Jane laughed. "I hope the day never comes when we push them right out of the state." After a long evening of waiting, everyone arrived at the same time. I hurried to open the door when we heard the sleigh bells, and Thomas and Mrs. Clark came in, brushing off the snow. Len was right behind them. "I'll put the horses in and be right back," Thomas said. "Is everything all right here?" "Just fine," Sarah Jane assured him. "And Ma, it's so good to see you. Mabel was all ready to take over. She grinned at me. "But I think she'll be glad to let you have charge." "I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner," Len said. "I was called out to see a logger who was injured. I thought Thomas surely would be back before dark, or I'd have stopped in to check on you myself."
We were fine, I told him. The man needed you more than we did.
Mrs. Clark hugged me. "It's good to see you girls again. Where is that baby, Mabel?" Alma was brought out to be admired, and after a cup of hot chocolate for the chilled travelers, we wrapped up to go home.
Remember, Thomas, you are to let me know as soon as you go for the doctor,
I told him. Sarah Jane's little girl arrived on January 10th, and we hurried over to see her. "She's not as pretty as Alma," Sarah Jane said. "But then I'm not as pretty as Mabel either, and we've managed all these years."
Don't be ridiculous,
I said.
She's a beautiful baby. If she's just like you, the world will be lucky. What are you going to call her?
"Jessica Rose," Sarah Jane replied, "for Ma and you. I think I decided that before I was out of grammar school. It will be fun when she and Alma can play together." Sarah Jane managed the first weeks better than I had. She appeared to suffer no bouts of anxiety over eating, sleeping, or bathing arrangements, and Jessica thrived, a content, happy baby. While Alma continued to watch us solemnly, with big brown eyes following every move, Jessica grinned and waved her arms about whenever anyone approached her cradle. She actually laughed out loud at 2 months of age for no apparent reason other than hearing us laugh. "I know she's brilliant," Sarah Jane said, "but she certainly doesn't understand what we're saying yet."
She inherited your good nature, I said. She doesn't have to stop and think what makes her happy.
Spring came early, and we held our breath as the balmy days continued, fearful that another storm might yet appear to cover the early flowers. It didn't, and in May we were spending long hours outdoors, enjoying the fragrance of the new grass. One morning I brought Alma out and put her on a blanket near the clothesline while I hung out the laundry. She was beginning to crawl, but she had never gone very far, and I was sure she wouldn't get off onto the grass. I talked to her as I pegged the clothes on the line. Len came through the gate from the pasture, followed by Lilac. The cow had the good sense to stop at the fence when she saw me. "Mabel, look at Alma," Len said suddenly. I turned to see what she was doing. Her eyes were on the cow, and she was making as much speed as she was capable of to reach the fence. Len picked up the baby and carried her to the gate, and I tagged along to see what she would do when she got close to that large animal. To my chagrin, she threw her arms around Lilac's nose and laughed out loud. "You are Papa's little girl, aren't you?" Len chuckled, and together they stood petting and cooing at the wretched cow. I went back to my clothes in disgust.
I guess you know what the child's first word will be,
I said glumly to Sarah Jane later.
It won't be Mama. She loves that cow. Len takes her out to pet it at least once a day, and she positively comes alive whenever Lilac gets into the yard.
"You could have worse rivals for your affection," Sarah Jane laughed. "Maybe Lilac feels a slight bit responsible for Alma's being here. She did hold you up when you went into the river a year ago." On our anniversary in May, Pa and Ma and Violet came, and once again we had a grand outdoor celebration. This time it was held in our own yard, and our many friends from the North Branch area attended. Ma was pleased to meet so many people she had just known by name.
I am fascinated with Colleen and Lorenzo, she said. I've been watching them talk together. I don't think I'm eavesdropping since I haven't the least idea what they're saying. Do you? Of course not, Ma. In fact, Colleen would be glad to tell you what they're saying. The rest of us are learning a little at a time, but we aren't with them as much as she is.
Elizabeth arrived with the young man who had come to join Thomas's surveying team. "He's a nice fellow," Thomas told us. "He's been coming into Jerome's office with the reports once a week. The rest of the time he has to work way out on the county line. We'll soon be finished out there, and he'll move into town." It didn't take him long to discover that Elizabeth was in the office. He usually manages to get there in time to have dinner with her.
Oh, I'm glad they're both here, I said. Maybe we can...
Mabel, Sarah Jane broke in, don't touch it.
You're right. Hands off, I promise. I've learned my lesson.
We have more guests, Len said beside me. Shall we go and meet them? I don't often have the chance to say lo and behold, Sarah Jane murmured, but it seems appropriate now. Coming through the gate was Hudson Curtis, accompanied by a nice-looking woman with 2 small children. Hudson was beaming with delight as he approached us. This is Widow Moore, soon to be Addie Curtis, he announced proudly when we had welcomed them. We'd like to be married in your church, Len, if that's all right with you. I'd be delighted, Len replied. I have one ceremony to perform on the 3rd of June. Any time after that will be fine. Hudson took the lady's arm. Addie, I want you to meet Miss O'Shea. She looks so much like Mabel here that I once spoke to her by mistake. Sarah Jane had a sudden coughing fit and I thumped her on the back.
Behave yourself. Just be thankful that Hudson has to be one of a kind and he'll soon be safely taken care of.
Later that evening, when everyone was gone except Thomas and Sarah Jane, we sat on the steps breathing in the fragrant night air.
Every day seems like dull routine until you look back on it, doesn't it?
I said.
Then you see how exciting life can be in a small town. Who needs the city?
The others nodded, and we listened silently to the cricket chorus and the contented munching of Lilac, who was grazing as close to the gate as she could get. End of Chapter 15. End of New Faces, New Friends.